Hello everybody. If you want to read all the stories in full, please go to www.steveuk.blog. Thank you. Short story 621, A Difficult Pet, Intermediate. Arthur lived in a small flat on the third floor and, whilst he loved a good book and a cup of tea, he often felt a bit lonely. He decided he needed a pet. But Arthur was not a man to do things by halves. He didn't want a boring cat or a noisy dog, he wanted something exotic. After much research, he settled on a jellyfish. A jellyfish, Arthur, his neighbour, Brenda, asked when she saw the enormous glass tank being delivered. In a flat? Are you mad? Arthur just smiled. This, Brenda, is Wobble. He's very peaceful. He just glides around. And look, the tank glows. And it did. The tank hummed quietly and emitted a soft, blue glow. All day and night, Wobble would drift about, a translucent, ethereal being. Brenda, however, was not impressed. She complained about the humming noise keeping her awake and said the blue light made her feel like she was living in a disco. One evening, a massive electrical storm hit. All the lights in the building flickered and went out. Oh no! Arthur gasped. Wobble's tank needed constant power to keep the water temperature steady. He grabbed a large plastic bowl and, with his phone's torchlight, went to perform the rescue. He was whisking the delicate creature out of the tank when he tripped over his own foot. The tank smashed, the water splashed everywhere, and something slimy and cold hit the floor with a wet thud. Wobble, he cried in a panic. Brenda, having heard the crash, came running in with her own torch. What's all this commotion? Is that a jellyfish on the floor? She shouted. They searched frantically in the dark. Arthur was convinced he could see a tiny, glowing shape moving under his sofa. Brenda, on her hands and knees, looked behind the television. I can't find it, she yelled, furious. It's probably already in my flat. Just then, the power came back on with a flash. The room was a disaster zone. Broken glass, soaked carpet, and a single, bright red jelly sweet, half melted, which had fallen from Arthur's pocket. It was the slimy, cold thing they'd been hunting for. Arthur and Brenda looked at the sweet, then at each other, and finally collapsed into laughter. Wobble, perfectly fine, was sitting safely in the plastic bowl. Perhaps, Arthur said with a sigh, a goldfish would be a better idea. Vocabulary notes. By halves, idiom. Meaning, to do something with a lot of effort, thoroughly, or completely. The phrase is almost always used in the negative, not do things by halves, meaning to do something enthusiastically. Example from the story, but Arthur was not a man to do things by halves. Similar words, phrases, wholeheartedly, enthusiastically, with full effort. For example, when she plans a party, she doesn't do it by halves, she hires a band and a caterer. Ethereal. Meaning, extremely delicate and light in a way that seems too perfect for this world. It often describes something that is very graceful or beautiful. Example from the story, Wobble would drift about, a translucent, ethereal being. Similar words, phrases, delicate, graceful, ghostly, translucent. Commotion. Meaning, a state of confused and noisy disturbance. Example from the story, what's all this commotion? She shouted. Similar words, phrases, noise, fuss, uproar, disturbance, racket. Frantically. Meaning, in a hurried, disorganized, or uncontrolled way, often because you feel anxious or worried. Example from the story, they searched frantically in the dark. Similar words, phrases, desperately, wildly, hectically, hurriedly. Collapsed into laughter. Meaning, to start laughing uncontrollably and suddenly, often so much that you lose your balance or fall down. Example from the story, and finally collapsed into laughter. Similar words, phrases, to burst out laughing, to double over with laughter, to be in stitches. Story written by Gemini Pro AI. Image created by Magix AI. To read all the stories in full, please go to www.steveuk.blog. Thank you. CC music, drifting at 432 Hz, unicorn heads.
Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever felt that quiet hum of loneliness? Maybe it pushed you towards a big, bold, possibly even, well, exotic change. Today, we're diving into a story that explores exactly that. And, where our grand plans can sometimes lead to the most unexpected and frankly hilarious outcomes.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is how our initial ambitions, often driven by this desire to really commit, to not do things by halves, how they could just get completely reshaped by reality and a bit of chaos, too.
Yeah.
Our mission for you today is to find the surprising nuggets within this tale of a very particular pet owner.
Right. So our journey begins with Arthur, living alone, feeling a bit isolated. And after a lot of research, he decided against, the usual suspects, no boring cat or noisy dog for him. He wanted something truly unique, something he called ethereal.
Ethereal, right. And what did he land on?
A jellyfish. He named it Wobble. And Wobble lived in this enormous tank. It hummed quietly, gave off this soft blue glow, Arthur's little oasis.
And there it is, the immediate contrast. Because while Arthur found peace in Wobble's translucent ethereal presence, his neighbor, Brenda, she saw only a commotion.
A commotion from a jellyfish tank.
Yeah, the humming noise, the blue light. It made her feel like she was living next to a disco, apparently.
Yeah.
It perfectly sets up this tension, doesn't it? Between Arthur's dream and, Brenda's reality. It's almost like confirmation bias in action. They both see what they expect to see.
That makes sense. His tranquility was her noise pollution. Okay, so things are already a bit tense.
Exactly. It shows how even just trying to create your own little perfect world can cause ripples before any real crisis hits.
And then the crisis hits. Here's where it gets really interesting. One evening, a massive electrical storm rolls in. Bang! Plunges the whole building into darkness.
Oh, no.
And Arthur's first thought, Wobble! The tank needs constant power.
Of course. Delicate creature.
So he's scrambling, totally frantic, trying to save his pet, grabs a plastic bowl, uses his phone torch, and in the panic, the darkness, he trips over his own feet. The tank smashes, water splashes everywhere, and something slimy and cold hits the floor. Thud.
Right. And this raises a really important question, doesn't it? In that moment of panic, in the dark, what assumptions do we make? Because Arthur and Brenda, who comes rushing in hearing the crash, they immediately assume the worst.
Oh.
Wobble is on a loose. That slimy, cold thing must be the jellyfish. They start searching frantically, peering under the sofa behind the TV. Brenda's yelling, "It's probably already crawled into my flat."
So they're literally hunting for a jellyfish escapee in the dark, driven by pure panic.
Precisely. It's what psychologists call catastrophizing. Your brain jumps straight to the most dramatic, worst-case scenario, especially when you can't see clearly and you're stressed. The unknown gets filled with fear.
Okay, so the big reveal. The power eventually flashes back on.
Sure.
The room is a total disaster zone. Waterlogged carpet, broken glass, but the slimy, cold culprit.
Not Wobble.
Not Wobble. It was a bright red jelly sweet. It must have fallen out of Arthur's pocket when he tripped, got wet and mushy.
Yeah. A jelly sweet. Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, and Wobble. Perfectly safe. Just sitting there calmly in the plastic bowl Arthur had managed to scoop him into before falling.
Wow.
They both just looked at the melted sweet, then at each other, and completely collapsed into laughter.
And if you connect that to the bigger picture, it's such a great moment. It shows how easily cognitive distortion takes over, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We build these huge narratives in our heads, the lights coming back on. That was the dose of reality they needed. It just punctured the whole catastrophe they'd imagined.
And led Arthur to a pretty clear, if funny, conclusion.
Which was?
He sighed and said, "Perhaps a goldfish would be a better idea."
Huh. A very sensible, if less ethereal choice. The lesson wasn't just about pets, but maybe about, our own mental leaps.
So what does this all mean for you listening? I think it's just a delightful reminder, really, that sometimes the most elaborate plans, the ones we pour everything into, they can end up culminating in a simple, shared laugh over something as mundane as a melted sweet.
Exactly. And it raises that important question. How often do our own anxieties, or maybe just an overactive imagination, send us on a frantic search? A search for problems that aren't actually there, kind of obscuring the simple truth of a situation. Think about how just a moment of panic can get totally diffused by a dose of reality. And then maybe a good sense of humor helps too. So maybe ask yourself, what assumptions do you tend to make first, especially when things feel a bit chaotic?